Good evening, folks. So lovely to see you all out on this stormy night. Thank you for coming. I'm Linda Harling-Stalker, the director of the Brian Mulroney Institute of Government here at StFX. Today we meet in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. As we listen to tonight's talk, let us remember the effects of colonization when it came to experiments and medical treatment of Indigenous people throughout the centuries as Western medicine came in and did some things that weren't nice, let's say. I am so thrilled to welcome this evening's speaker. On behalf of Frank McKenna Center for Leadership and the Mulroney Institute, we are thrilled to welcome Canadian author and educator, Dr. Jennifer Fraser, who will be here to share insights into her new book, The Gaslit Brain, Protect Your Brain from the Lies of Bullying, Gaslighting, and Institutional Complicity, which are available at the back, which if I don't remember to say, she says she'll sign them later on if you'd like a signed copy as well. This book looks at what's happening in a world of that's being increasingly shaped by disinformation, political division, and toxic leadership. The Gaslit Brain is the first book linking gaslighting directly to measurable neurological damage and to offer science-backed strategies to counter it. Drawing on over 10 years of studying neuroscience of abuse cultures, Dr. Fraser presents the evidence that gaslighting and psychological manipulation don't just harm emotionally, they physically alter the brain, eroding trust, critical thinking, and resilience. So Dr. Fraser is an international expert on abuse cultures, those who resist them, and the way they impact brain function. She has been researching and teaching about abuse and resistance for almost 2 decades. Dr. Fraser taught critical reading and textual analysis in the Literary Studies program at the University of Toronto. In 2003, she moved with her husband's work and their children to Victoria, BC, where she became an award-winning teacher in an international boarding school. When she heard directly from students that they were being abused by 4 teachers, she reported not only to school administrators, but also to government regulators. She resigned in protest from the school as a whistleblower and now sits on the board of Whistleblowing Canada Research Society. Dr. Fraser has advocated with 2 parliamentary committees in Canada for better protection for children from abuse by educators, and she has presented before the Senate in Massachusetts who are creating legislation to protect employees from psychological abuse in the workplace. She was asked to present at the University of Oxford in the largest annual European conference on health and trauma in 2024 on her research into how abuse damages brain architecture. Her first book on abuse culture and its correlation was correlation with war, was Be a Good Soldier, and was published in 2011 by University of Toronto Press. And further books followed, Teaching Bullies in 2015, The Bullied Brain in 2022, and tonight's book, Gaslit Brain. Dr. Fraser writes regular series, The Bullied Brain, for Psychology Today, and works as an international presenter and consultant on abuse cultures and ways to transform them. During this evening, Dr. Fraser will present for about 25 minutes or so. Is that correct? And then at that point, we welcome and invite up Dr. Katie Albrecht, our Canada Research Chair in Health Equity and Social Justice, a fellow of the Brian Mulroney Institute of Government. Dr. Albrecht will be the discussant on the book and will engage with Dr. Fraser and some of the ideas she's presented. They'll be up here for about 20 minutes or so, and then at that point, we'll open the floor for your questions and answers. So at that point, folks, please join me in a hearty welcome to Dr. Fraser.
I am very honored to be here. I have greatly enjoyed interacting with students and faculty. I would like to especially thank Dr. Harleen Stalker and Dr. Albrecht and Dr. Zuschlag for being so wonderful and such thoughtful hosts at the Mulroney Institute of Government. I would also like to thank Dr. Young and his student leadership mentors, who've also been wonderful and thoughtful hosts in the McKenna Leadership Center. So why do I study abuse cultures? From the age of 13 to 17, I was abused in a public school in Vancouver by 3 teachers who abused students physically, emotionally, and sexually for 10 years before they were identified and faced the law. At the time, as a child, I had no language to describe what was happening. I now know from neuroscientists that when we do not have vocabulary to articulate what we are experiencing, we cannot talk to ourselves about it, let alone report it to others. This experience, however, has informed my work. I completely buried it until 30 years later when I witnessed my teenage son being exposed to similar humiliating, limiting, destructive, sexually tinged abuse. It amazed me with the remarkable technological changes that have occurred over 3 decades. Little had changed in terms of our understanding of abuse and how it worked and why it was covered up and enabled in institutions rather than halted and remedied. I learned that all forms of bullying and abuse, including all forms that do not touch the body, can do physical damage to brain architecture. And how I started was, as I will explain a little bit later, it's sort of an unusual thing for a trained literary arts educator to go into science in order to write and work on. But what happened to me was I looked first at the medicine, I then looked at the psychiatry, I looked at the psychology, and then I hit the brain science. And the brain science, I must tell you all, is so illuminating as to what's going on. It answers, I mean, for me, it answered all kinds of intractable, impossible to understand problems. And so that's why I draw on it. So let me just say that one more time because it's an incredibly important point. It's pretty startling. I would imagine you haven't heard it before. I learned that all forms of bullying and abuse, including all forms that do not touch the body, can do physical damage to brain architecture. And all of you will know that we do not have laws that protect our brains from this type of physical abuse. This damage is visible on brain scans. When your brain is harmed, it of course affects how you think, how you feel, how you problem solve, how you behave, everything about you. It's far more serious than a broken bone, and it takes longer to heal. But for the most part, as you know, these scientific facts have not entered into culture and society. We still talk about bullying as if it's a child's problem, and as if we pay attention to children who bully other children, we'll be able to solve the problem. That would be like trying to solve world hunger or economic disparity or racism by looking at child populations. That's never going to change those things, just like it will never change bullying. But we always think of it, or we're trained to think of it, as if it's a child's problem. The good news is, and I'm not going to spend time on it today, I'm sorry to report, but I do want you to know it. If you know people or you yourself have had a traumatized brain from bullying and abuse, and it's very serious, it damages brain architecture, your brain is wired to repair and recover. Our brains are remarkable at rewiring. And we'll talk more about that, but I just don't want anyone to feel sort of horrible about that. The bullied brain has 10 steps, evidence-based steps, that are exactly about how we can rewire our brains when we've suffered this kind of specific trauma. So I was an award-winning teacher at this school. This is in Victoria, BC, in 2012. That's when it started. I was an award-winning teacher at this school where my son was being abused. So the people that were doing the abuse were my colleagues. And I'll tell you right now, I wouldn't have guessed it. You never saw them behave that way in public. All of it was behind closed doors. In other words, they had a split personality, and we're not trained to recognize that in people. I'm not telling you about the award part to impress you. It's irrelevant. I'm only telling you so that you're very clear on the way that individuals with talent and integrity are often scapegoated in abuse cultures. We have a tendency to believe that if you work really hard, if you have talent, if you work so well that you go up and you get promoted and you're acknowledged, that is kind of a safety net around you. And in abuse culture, it's actually the opposite. It's far more likely to put a target on your back. I had worked with leadership and colleagues at this school for 8 years. I knew them all, every single player involved in this scenario, very, very well. I was very happy at this school and a high contributor. But I had heard from parents directly about students, including my son, who were being abused by teachers under the auspices of coaching basketball. I reported psychological and physical abuse to the head of school, and he said to me in response, "Oh, that's just old school coaching." Now that speech act, really, if you think of it, is gaslighting. And it has a series of meanings. We'll get more in depth into the official definition of what gaslighting is, but I want to walk you through what it's like in real time, how it sounds. It's so subtle, you don't recognize it. I knew in the instant when he said that there was something wrong, but I didn't have the vocabulary. I couldn't have labeled it gaslighting at all. Didn't know anything about it. I had to learn about it by myself. So when he says to me, "Oh, that's just old school coaching," in response to, "I'm reporting to you psychological and physical abuse," what he's saying is, you don't understand reality. What you perceive as abuse is actually coaching in a traditional manner. So what he's saying in that moment is that I can't trust my own perceptions. I have a tendency to exaggerate, perhaps, or maybe I'm hysterical. He is telling me in that moment, when I report something as serious as that being done by my colleagues to students, including my son, that he controls my livelihood, he controls my career, and he controls my reputation. And I have a choice now, and he's presenting it to me. I have a choice to choose my reality or his, and I'd better choose very carefully. So you should hear in that an implied threat. I did not know the term gaslighting then, but I knew there was something very wrong. Being a trained researcher, I left his office and I went straight to the research. I discovered that his reading of reality, what he was trying to sell me on as old school coaching, was completely out of touch with medicine, psychiatry, psychology, and especially neuroscience. So let's just read this. Gaslighting, this is the official 2022 definition. It's changed over time. The word gaslighting originated in 1944 with a Hollywood film where a husband is gaslighting his wife. They're newlyweds. She's madly in love. He's love bombing her, which means he's giving her an outpouring of adoration and so on. So of course she believes him. She trusts him. She thinks he's wonderful. And he starts this very slow gaslighting operation where he tries to bit by bit make her think that she's completely insane. And near the end of the film, she believes that she's insane and needs to go to an asylum. But she's saved by a Hollywood police officer. I didn't have a Hollywood police officer in my story, so I had to do it by myself. But basically, in 2022, this old word got modernized and it became the word of the year because it was looked up 1,740% more often than before because of what was happening geopolitically. You can cast your minds back to that time to imagine why many people wanted to understand what is this gaslighting all about. And the key for me in my use of the word in the gaslit brain is there has to be an agenda. There has to be a reason that the person is misleading you. It can't just be accidental. It can't be a mistake. It can't be something going wrong in some complex way. Absolutely not. For me, it has to have an agenda. My boss at the school had an agenda, which I found out later. And that agenda was that he had been informed by a lawyer a year before that abuse was occurring in the basketball program. And he hadn't done anything effective to address it. And he hadn't informed parents. And we unwitting parents put our children into that program and they were abused. It is a massive issue around negligence for him, so he had to cover up. And I was the unwitting victim of all of that. But there has to be an agenda. That was his. In the movie, the husband knows that the house that they're living in that belonged to her aunt has jewels hidden in the attic. He's looking in the attic. He's trying to find them. Only way he could get access to the house was to marry this woman, which he did. And then he manipulates her, hopefully getting her off into an asylum so he can do a really careful job to find the jewels. So that's the original. So gaslighting in 2022 is a driver of disorientation and mistrust, like it was back in the day. Gaslighting is the act or practice of grossly misleading someone, especially for one's own advantage. Now, just a quick, interesting neuroscience aside. When people tell self-serving, they have to be self-serving lies, so lies with an agenda that's going to do something for you, the brain starts to stop giving you an alert, like a threat alert in the amygdala. The amygdala, ultimately, it's a part of the brain that's like, you're crossing a line here. This is a social issue. You're breaching conduct and protocol. Like, this is really risky. All of us, when we lie, we start to sweat. Our heart races. It causes anxiety because we know it's wrong. And our amygdala, if we could see it, is alerting us. The person who tells repeat self-serving lies stops that firing up in the brain, and that's how you slowly but surely become a pathological liar. You'll just lie for self-serving reasons and it doesn't even register. So ultimately, in this definition of gaslighting in 2022, where it became different was that it applied to personal relationships and political relationships, and that's the big shift. So gaslighting has become a much used word in response to our geopolitical climate right now, where there is a rise in blatant lying, manipulating, and distortion of facts. It is said we are in a war on truth. To give you a full understanding of how gaslighting works, I'm going to read you responses from early reviews to the Gaslit Brain, which is set in the workplace for the most part. My publisher said I was not allowed to talk about politics at all, which meant 80 pages went into the garbage can. So when you're reading it, if you read it, just know that there's political meaning behind everything, but it's just not very out there on the page. So I'm going to give you what people said because it was startling to me, their takeaway from this book on gaslighting. I'm quoting from other people. With the powerful reminder that abuse often hides in plain sight, we stop noticing it. The book invites us to reflect critically on our roles, whether as bystanders, leaders, or survivors. Gaslighting, as this book makes clear, is not just a personal issue, but a systemic, cultural one. Here's another one. Gaslighting destabilizes the person by rewiring the brain and causing dysregulation. The victim becomes disorientated, develops foggy thinking, clouded by white noise, anxiety, depression, deteriorating performance, and even suicide. Here's another one. Gaslighting is a kind of neurological warfare. It's not just someone messing with your head. It's someone trying to rewrite the circuitry that tells you what's real and what's not. Another one. Gaslighting undermines trust, distorts perception, and destabilizes entire organizations. Fraser shows how the brain becomes a battleground when truth is under attack. And the final one, What sets this work apart is the integration of science with story. Her accounts of real-world leaders, whistleblowers, and everyday professionals who were vilified by speaking up reveal not only how gaslighting unfolds, but how it endures unless it is named and dismantled. Oh, this is actually the last one, sorry. Particularly powerful is her framing of gaslighting as a series of elaborate falsehoods designed to divide its victims externally and internally, leaving them isolated and uncertain of their own truth. Misleading, which is how we might characterize that kind of leadership. We're seeing it in a number of places in the world today at very, very high levels. Misleading is something that we have not had in Canada, maybe in human ways, fallible human ways, small ways, maybe ideological ways, ways that we, all of us, make errors, but not as a leadership model, not as an abuse culture, which is what we see in other places in the world. We've been privileged in Canada to have had and continue to have leadership that we would be hard-pressed to accuse of telling pathological lies that distort reality, that make us question our own perception, that destabilize our nation, and that opens us up to attacks of diverse kinds. We have had a history of leadership, not misleading. Those who bully, lie, and gaslight suffer from brain damage. It's referred to by neuroscientists very specifically as empathy erosion. They frequently come from a background of emotional abuse and neglect. That is why they have damaged brains. They become what psychologists refer to as the dark triad. They become individuals who are narcissists, Machiavellians, and psychopaths. Their brains are similar and different from one another. What they share, however, is an objectification of other people. They don't see other people, not even their favorites, not even their family, as human beings. They see them as objects. And that's because they have empathy erosion. Just to remind you, empathy is when you walk in someone else's shoes. It's when you feel their joy and triumph. It's when you can actually literally feel their pain. And when you feel their pain, it's a mirroring effect in the brain. If you put two people into fMRI machines, you showed them very disturbing images, or you pricked or hurt the hand of one person, the other person will reflect that person's pain. They're not having their body hurt, but their brain will register the same mirroring pain as the other person. That's why you are feeling it. It's in your brain. And it's a muted version in empathy, which is really fascinating. It's muted because you are meant to go and help that person. You're not meant to be incapacitated by the pain like they are. You are meant community, civilization, connection. You are meant to go and help. So somebody who has grown up in their formative years and has suffered really intensive emotional and psychological abuse and neglect, their empathy has gotten so eroded that they no longer have those feelings. They don't have any feelings. You will sometimes see an individual, like in a domestic abuse situation, the person will put on a crime of passion sort of scene, an enormous amount of violence. And oftentimes when you look at it, you can recognize that it's a display. They're not actually feeling the feelings of rage. They are mimicking. And individuals who have empathy erosion in the dark triad, so narcissists, Machiavellians, and psychopaths, they are absolutely brilliant at putting on a mask of sanity. They watch people to figure out what is the correct emotional reaction. How would I make it look on my face? What words do I say? Do I need to put tears in my eyes? I can do that. But it's all false. It's fake. They're conjuring up something that's not there. When gaslighters are in position of power, let alone extreme power, they create abuse cultures. Our brains may decide to block out the betrayal as simply too threatening. It's a survival mechanism. We look the other way when fraud, safety violations, abuse, and other wrongdoing occurs because we are dependent on the powerful perpetrator for our livelihood, our career, our reputation. We become blind to betrayal, and the brain is exceptionally good at blocking out things it does not want to see. If your brain decides that it's too dangerous to report what you saw, you won't report it. It's not because you're a bad person. It's not because you're a weak person. It's because your brain has said to you, you want to put your head on the chopping block? Not on my watch. I'm not going to let you do that. And this is why whistleblowers are the rarest, arguably most insane individuals, because they go against the brain directive and they report and they pay a terrible price for it. In the Gaslit Brain, I've drawn on neuroscience to create 6 proven strategies for resisting gaslighting. It's a book about prevention. The goal is to prevent the trauma of gaslighting from happening. You are not going to let it even enter into your psyche or your neurology or your physiology. You're going to learn how to block it. That's the whole goal of the book. These 6 strategies are designed to create protective neurological armor that gives us a far better chance to stay safe and sane. Turning again to what others have said about the book, here's a description of the final section that has the 6 tools in it. I'm quoting, "The Gaslit Brain doesn't simply diagnose the problem, it offers a path forward. The 3rd section of the book outlines 6 neuroscience-informed strategies. Proprioception, exteroception, interoception, neuroception, perception, and hemispheric balance." Now, if I had my way, those would not sound like strange foreign words. They would be household words, commonplace words, because if we don't understand how our brain creates reality, we can't protect our brains against people who want to manipulate it. And those words sound foreign just because we've never heard them, but they're actually very basic. They're as basic as any other word. And over time, you can, of course, learn them. This book is written as a neuroplasticity book, which means it is constructed to fire up and wire into your brain the way in which you learn, which is by repetition at timed intervals. That's how the brain learns. So if you think about it, that's how we teach school. That's how we teach in the workplace. When we want someone to learn something, we don't say, here's an hour-long workshop, or here is, a manual, just read it and you'll get it. That's not how our brains learn. They learn by repetition at timed intervals. The phrase in neuroscience is what fires together, wires together. So that is how the book is constructed. Every single time you think you're forgetting something, it comes right back and goes, oh, remember this. Remember how that worked? Yeah, apply it to this over and over and over again. So hopefully, and we'll see if it works, by the time people finish it, they are experts in gaslighting and abuse cultures and how to protect themselves, specifically how to protect their brain. Each tool, this individual says, for restoring clarity and agency and mental health is hard work. They're not quick fixes. They are practices that invite readers to become what Fraser calls dishabituation entrepreneurs, capable of resisting normalization and recognizing subtle harm before it calcifies into crisis. Now, the weakest thing that we have in our brain, all of us have it, all of us are vulnerable to this, is people who normalize. When you are in a culture, society, a workplace, a family, a marriage that normalizes behaviors by repeating them over and over and over again, guess what? Your brain fires it up and it wires it in. And we can learn to do absolutely heinous, terrible, shocking, for the history books, kinds of behaviors simply because it is hammered into us day in, day out. When you hear and this is why algorithms and the internet and social media are geared towards feeding you the same material over and over and over again, it's because they have neuroscientists advising them. So if they want you to absolutely be trapped in a loop that teaches you how to think a certain way or believe certain things about other people or think that a leader is telling you the truth when they're lying, they are doing that very purposely to you. And that's why university and some high schools are places of resistance because they're teaching you to be critical thinkers. They're teaching you to turn that loop off and really listen to diverse perspectives and look at research and weigh things and think about the implications and where it is that you've decided that this person is truthful and this person is false. And when you start to think that way, it's really quite interesting. You get to a point where you can't stop seeing the manipulation. You see it everywhere. And so that's what I'm hoping the book does for people's brains. A multi-war veteran wrote, and he's talking about these 6 tools. He says, the 6 ways: strengthen your senses, trust your gut, tune your threat radar, resist normalization, seek balance, use both logic and intuition. This is the new field manual. They're how you keep your mind your own. So let's take a look at these quickly. So the first way that we can protect our brains is what's called exteroception. Now, that's a big word for senses. We have brain training programs. There's one brain training program that's the only one that's got 100 or more independent studies that show that it actually makes a lasting change in the brain. What it does is it sharpens your senses. It sharpens your hearing, it sharpens your vision, your peripheral vision, your ability to use your working memory, to navigate, to have very high levels of processing speed. It's no fun. It's really hard work. It's like going to a gym and doing repetitions every single day, 5 days a week, when you really don't want to. That's what it's like. It's online, it's gamified, it's designed by neuroscientists, but it is designed for exteroception, to make you create a sharp vision of reality. Because the sharper your vision, it's like if you were going to go into the boxing ring, you would train. You would never go in and fight somebody without doing the training because they're just going to knock you out. Same thing with mental manipulation. You don't want to ever go into the boxing ring, which is just opening up the news today. It's going onto social media. It's listening to leaders in our world today. You don't want to do that without the training, the mental training, the rigor, because they will manipulate you. So that's exteroception. That's tool number 1. Tool number 2 is interoception. So you can hear the shift. Exteroception is the world that's around you, the outside, the environment. You need to be a really good reader of that reality. Your brain is taking in tons and tons of data, 24/7. If you're awake, it's taking in data. And interoception is all the information you're getting from your internal system. So a really good example of this, and we're very unaware of it. You're getting this information from your physiology, from your gut and your heart and your temperature and all of these things that our body is constantly telling us. We don't pay attention to it. It's unconscious for the most part. But if you get really good at finding the correct words in order to represent what it is, then you get much more adept at having a relationship with it, not letting it rule you, but in fact, having the agency and the empowerment to rule your physiological self. And they've done, I'll just give you 2 studies, but it'll give you an idea of what they're like. So they did a big research study on judges. And, you know, we tend to think of judges as the most untouchable people when it comes to just really making the right decision. They've got all the information. They weigh consequences. They're highly trained. I mean, they're sort of paragons of ethics. That's a judge, right? Well, what they found was that judges were shockingly more likely to give parole to somebody after lunch than before lunch. And that means before lunch, they're cranky and they're hungry and they've got low energy, and it affects everything that they think. They aren't marshaling the vocabulary of, I'm really hungry, it feels unpleasant, I'm feeling almost angry here, and I'm going to take it out on this guy in front of me who's hoping and praying for parole and has every right to it. I'm not even going to look at the facts. I'm just going to make my decision based on how I feel. They don't even know they're doing it, but they are doing it. Here's another research study that's very unfortunate to hear about, but it's good to know. If you are interviewed for a job and it's a rainy day, the stats on it are, again, shocking. You're much less likely to get that job because the person doesn't like the rain. They're thinking about the rain. They're thinking about how they're going to get home in the rain and they're going to get wet and how it's going to affect them. They feel cold and damp and it's kind of dark. There's no bright sun. They feel a little bit hopeless, and that all affects your job interview. So it just goes to show you, we think of ourselves as these completely, it all hinges on education and rationality and our morality and so no, it has a lot to do with our physiology and what our body is telling us. And when we get really adept at having a rich vocabulary for it, it affects everything we do. It affects our decision making around how we respond to situations and how we think and how easy it is to manipulate us. So that's interoception. That's tool number 2. Tool number 3 is called neuroception. And again, this should just be a word that we all know, because neuroception, every single person in this room right now has an active neuroception happening. You are all reading this room. You're reading me. You're reading the space behind you there. You're reading the lights. You're reading everything in this room for threat. And I mean, think how it can get heightened. It can be heightened on an airplane. It can be heightened when you're walking down the street. It gets activated at nighttime. You are always, your system is always reading for threat. And so it can take a huge amount of energy out of us, especially if, again, we don't know anything about it. It's happening automatically. So we don't have agency. We're not able to control what it is or name what's happening. But there's 3 stress responses. You will all know them, but it's worth just quickly going over, especially since we're talking about abuse culture. When we are feeling completely at risk or completely stressed out by another person and the way they're behaving, and it can be extremely subtle. It can be something like they cut you off or they ignore you. It doesn't have to be active. Our law is about, it's a measuring stick of the more active something is, the more wrong it is. But in the gaslighting psychological abuse world, that's just the opposite. Our brains are incredibly impacted by being ostracized or scapegoated or put in an out group or ignored, not given feedback. These kinds of things are devastating for the brain because the brain knows it only survives in community. That's the only way we're going to make it. Of course, people can go out into the wilderness and give it a shot, but we all know that is not how humanity survives. So neuroception is tool number 3. The more we know about it, the better. We can have our stress response of freeze, which means literally our body completely shuts down on a very primal level. It is plain dead, and that's how we survive. And again, the law is so divorced right now, and culture as well from neuroscience, that they will, in a court of law, they'll say, well, you didn't run away, you didn't fight back, you obviously consented. You were complicit in what happened, and now you're bringing this up. What is it? You're trying to make money or something? Like, what are you doing? And that's a complete misreading of the neuroscience. You don't make the choice to go into freeze, to shut down, to play dead. Your brain decides that that's the only way you're going to make it out alive. And so these are the kinds of things we all need to know. If that happens to you, you need to know that's what's going on. The other ones, of course, are fight. You become highly aggressive or extremely angry, or you yourself begin to behave in bullying manners. That's because you're stress activated. You're using it as a defense mechanism. And then, of course, the other one is flight. You just go into avoidance. You are late. You don't get your work done. You don't pick up the phone when you're supposed to. We all know what this is like. It's an avoidance technique, and it's your brain telling you you're just not coping and it's not safe. Well, this is all neuroception at work. And the most interesting thing about neuroception is one of the best remedies for all of us, and I said I wasn't going to talk about good things, but I just have to say a quick aside. One of the best remedies for the type of stress we get from other people in interpersonal situations in abuse cultures is co-regulation. We are able to co-regulate one another's bodies. When you are with people that you trust, that care, that meet your eyes, that use a sing-song voice, that reach out and put their hand on your shoulder, it can completely calm your system, your physiology right down. It's amazing. And it's one of the best things to do. We have a tendency to go and hide, to withdraw, to think that the fault is ours, especially if we've been gaslit. If we've been gaslit, we're full of shame. We think we're unstable. We don't want anyone to know. So they drive you away. They make you isolate. They try and keep you away from family and friends, because anything like that is going to interrupt their control over you. And it is a bid for power, gaslighting, always on a geopolitical leadership level or on an interpersonal level. Remember, we can swing from personal to political when we use gaslighting today. So if you have been gaslit, if you have been abused, if you are in one of those abuse cultures, co-regulate, go and get people and be with them, because it's one of the best things for your system. The fourth one I call perception, but really what I'm encouraging people to do is put on progressive lenses. And that was the metaphor I came up for, to help people understand that we tend to see people as a singular person. But I don't know if you remember, if you go back to my personal experience with my colleagues who I saw day in, day out. Day in, day out, I never saw them yell. I never saw them swear. I never saw them grab anybody. I never saw them detain anybody to yell in their face, like grab them and yell in their face. I never saw them do public humiliation, use homophobia or misogyny. I never once saw it. So if I didn't have my progressive lenses on and students came and parents came and reported psychological and physical abuse to me, I would have said to them, I know these people and I've never seen them do it, and therefore they couldn't do it. They can't behave that way because I've never seen it. I've only ever seen Dr. Jekyll. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, if you recall, is a 19th century book. It should have trained all of us in abuse cultures and psychopathic brains. We should have learned it then, but we still have not yet. It's used when people write about abusers in the news, in the media. You'll often see them refer to, oh, it's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. You know, Dr. Jekyll is going to church on Sundays and is a loving father and a devoted husband. But behind closed doors, he's done X, Y, and Z. And if you think about some of our most prominent abusive individuals who've abused in organizations, in institutions for 20, 30 years, Harvey Weinstein, Jerry Sandusky, Dr. Larry Nassar, these individuals had split personalities. They had, you know, Harvey Weinstein made a big show of being a supporter of women. He was a great feminist, right? He marched in women's marches. He created a whole program to support female directors. Meryl Streep said he's a god. Well, all these people were talking about Dr. Jekyll without understanding that there was also this monstrous, murderous, destructive Mr. Hyde behind closed doors. And so this is why, even though it's hard work, it's not easy. We're so well trained to be trusting and caring and give people benefit of the doubt. You do, but not when you're in an administrative position, in a leadership position, in an organization. You have to know that Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde are an absolute reality, and their greatest skill is covering up the abuse that they do. Sorry to say. So that's tool number 4. So it's seen with a dual vision at all times. I'll give you one more example of how this works. I talked with one of the classes about this, and they really got it, a poli-sci class. I don't know if you know that in your Greek mythology, but basically there's this great gift given in the middle of the Trojan War. It's called the Trojan horse. It's this big, huge wooden horse. There's been a war of attrition for 10 years. The Trojans are thrilled. They've had the gates locked up. They've been locked in. No one can, the Greeks can't get them. 10 years they've been trying to get in. No chance. The Greeks have left. The fleet of ships have gone. And the Trojans sort of cautiously come out and they're like, is this really over? Oh my goodness, why did they leave this big, huge horse here? It looks like a gift. And they're told that it's a gift to the gods. It's a gift to a specific god, it doesn't matter who, but it's a gift. And they get convinced that by this whole idea, it's a kind of a complex transaction that happens here, but just for the sake of brevity, just trust me, they think it's a gift. They bring it into the gates. They lock the gates back up. They have a huge party. And in the middle of the night, Greek soldiers come out of the Trojan horse. They lift up the flap in this huge wooden thing. They pour out and they slaughter the Trojans while they're sleeping. There's only a few that survive. It was the end of the city of Troy. And so when you get a gift, you have to always keep in the back of your mind. When someone tells you they love you so much and they think you're the greatest person on the planet, and it's only been a couple of weeks, but they're just showering you with gifts, and in fact, they sound like your best friend. They know everything about you. You share with them your vulnerabilities. You don't know. You have to be, in this time and age right now especially, you have to be cautious. You need to have progressive lenses on. You need to look at what's right in front of you, whether it's a political leader or a party or a person, and reserve that part of yourself for safety that has that more distant lens that allows for the possibility, just the possibility, that it might not really be a great gift. It might not be true love. It might be love bombing. It might not be, a doctor you're dealing with. It could be Mr. Hyde. So number 5, I call proprioception. I'm taking that word. Proprioception really means balance. It's when you physically are balancing yourself. I apply that concept to this tool. Really what it is, just to put it in a nutshell, is it's a recommendation to avoid mental shortcuts at all turns. Don't use them. They are the most dangerous thing for your brain. Our brain, if we don't control it with our mind, our brain leaps to conclusions. It's one of its weaknesses. One of its weaknesses is habituation. It will make anything seem normal after a period of time, including an abuse culture. So you've got to be really careful of that tendency of the brain. You also have to be careful of its tendencies to leap to conclusions. It uses prejudice. It uses biases. It has all kinds of things like halo effect, which you've probably heard of. If you take a look at Fox News presenters, for example, you'll find a lot of Pete Hegseth type looking people, sort of perfect people, Hollywood people. They're very into how they look. They look gorgeous. They look glamorous, and your brain will start to believe them because of how they look. That is the halo effect. You will make all kinds of decisions based on whether or not you like somebody. It's the affective effect. And it's when you decide within seconds that someone is likable or they're not likable. If they're likable, you believe them. If they're unlikable, like maybe a bit irritating to you or not your style, or they kind of rub you the wrong way, maybe you find them a bit threatening, you don't like their tone of voice, that is enough for you to make the mistake to think that what they're telling you is not true. Your brain is, my brain, all of us are highly susceptible to this. So that's tool number 5. Tool number 6 is about balancing the hemispheres. One of the most interesting things is that our brain has lateralization. That means our left hemisphere of our brain and our right hemisphere are completely different. They approach the world with 2 different realities, and they talk to each other. The corpus callosum is the place where they do their exchanges and talking, but they are different. The left hemisphere is I call it the opportunist. So the left hemisphere is laser focused. It's how we survive. It's the part of the brain that would really be useful if you were hunting, or you needed to recognize if there was another tribe approaching and they were dangerous. It is the part of the brain that's really good at finding mushrooms and foraging. It is a laser focused on finding what you need, getting it, and they call it getting and feeding. It's the part of the brain that keeps you alive. It's critical, but it also has a tendency to take over. And if you just glance around at what's happening in the world today, you will see that there's an awful lot of people that are fueling the opportunist left side of the brain, and they've kind of cut off the right side of the brain, which is very, very worrisome. The right side of the brain is all about connection and community and the divine and nature. It feels part of a vast and kind of holy network. If you could be in the right side of your hemisphere, you would feel nothing but bliss. You would feel part of something so enormous and so glorious that it would take your breath away. But we can't afford to be in that part of the brain in a harsh world. We have to keep ourselves sort of shuttling back and forth. But what has happened is we have a tendency, we've seen it throughout history, where we tilt too much left. We're in an era right now where we see a lot of grasping and getting and greed and self-aggrandizement. We see people who can't have enough money and they don't care what happens to the planet or any other people for them to get it. So that is the left hemisphere at work, and it's not a healthy place to be for society or for individuals. We need to balance between those 2 hemispheres. So that final tool is a real bid for get to know the right side and spend as much time in it as possible, and recognize the danger of people who are unable to enter back into that sphere. So you'll notice that a lot of what we talked about today was about duality. There is 2 ways to look at a gift. One, your culture has trained you to look at a gift as a positive thing, but you need to be very careful, especially in a war on truth, and we are in a war on truth. So when we're in a dangerous time like this, you must reserve part of yourself that is very cautious to make sure that that gift isn't a Trojan horse. You want to have two sets of emotion concepts, which is the word the neuroscientists use. You want to have two sets of vocabulary. You want to be cautious and wary about what you decide and what you choose to do. You want to be aware that there could be two people in one body. And that's really, really hard for the brain to understand. Our brains push back against that because it doesn't make sense to the brain. But the reality is there are Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hydes out there, and you need to be able to see them for what they are. Put your progressive lenses on, not your blinders. You don't want to be blind to betrayal. Even though it's a more comfortable place to be, there's power in numbers. And if all of us take our blinders off at once and we join together and we work together and we're strong together, we can topple the individuals that are very dangerous in the dark triad. We want to be able to use a dual set of empathy and recognize dual sets of empathy. It's complicated, I won't go into it, but just trust me when I say we have not just an affective empathy, which is what we talked about. Individuals who are in the dark triad, they have eroded affective empathy. It's why they don't feel anything. But we also have cognitive empathy, and that's our ability to read each other. And individuals in the dark triad are Machiavellians, narcissists, and psychopaths. They are masters of cognition. They're masters of cognition and language. So if we don't get up to speed and build up our language and our vocabulary to identify them and know them and have a whole way of talking to each other about protecting our brains, they're going to get us, really. So if you want to, when you do Brain HQ and you work on your exteroception, you do that brain training program and you're sharpening your senses, what you're doing is sharpening all higher level functions because they depend on a sharp version of reality, not a fuzzy one, not a foggy one, a brain fog one, absolutely not. If you're going into the arena with these individuals that are very destructive and on a very large scale, you need to be able to have sharp cognition. They certainly do. Their cognitive empathy is fully intact. They know what makes you tick. They can read you like a book. That's why they're so effective. People tend to think that gaslighting happens to gullible people who are ignorant and uneducated. It doesn't. It happens to all of us. We are all, no matter how smart, no matter how long we've been on the planet, around the block, promoted, doesn't matter. We're all susceptible. One of the best things to remember when you're dealing with gaslighting is that a psychiatric expert who specializes in psychopathology, if you put that guy across the table from the gaslighter, within 20 to 25 minutes, the psychiatric expert is doubting his own perception of reality. That's all it takes for them to get you. And these are the experts. So if the experts are struggling, the rest of us have got to work hard to build this kind of protection around one another and around our brains and how we work on this. So I just want to talk about one other Nova Scotia leader who really, when I saw this, I was so excited because, you know, when you write a book, you don't need a gaslighter around because you start to just feel insane all by yourself because you're in a room all day long writing about things and you don't know if people care or it matters or it's going to help anyone or change anything. And so this idea of the progressive lenses, I was like, whoa, this is really out there. People are going to just be like, what is she talking about? What do you mean I have to see two things at once? That doesn't make sense. But it's the same idea as we have here from Albert Marshall. It's this idea. He has a beautiful version of it. I don't know if you know about it, but he talks, another Canadian leader, a leader here for you in Nova Scotia and all of us. He talks about two-eyed seeing. And what he means is we need to see with two eyes. We need to see with the Indigenous eye, which would be very right brain. He doesn't say right brain, but if he knew about the neuroscience, he would. And then we need to see with the Western eye, the opportunist eye. We need to see with both of them. And the brain science completely backs this notion. If you read, I mean, you all know lots of stuff probably about Indigenous culture. It is so right-brained. It's about connection and community. It's about nature. It's about our ties to nature. It's about how nature is totally animated and spiritual. And we need to have that kind of sacred bond and be aware of it. That's just how they live. And Western culture is really deep in the opportunist. I'm not going to survive. I've had to immigrate and everything's at risk and I've got to protect my family. I have to protect my people. Everything's a danger. I'm just going to be in attack mode and grasp everything for myself. You know, so you can see how it happens. It happens to all of us. it's a really blissful thing, as I said, to be in the right hemisphere, but we can all understand how much we tilt sometimes left. And what's interesting with abusive leaders on the geopolitical stage, they are very adept at whipping up our feelings of fear. They are constantly playing to our neuroception, because the more we are detecting threat and we think there are so-called enemies out there that are going to get us or take our jobs or hurt us, or they're criminals, or they're going to do these terrible things, they're going to destroy the economy, they've sort of slipped in and we must drive them out. That kind of talk is meant to make you feel so much fear that you can't think straight anymore. So it's the gaslit brain is not about fear. It's about recognizing that it is used as a way to manipulate you. Gaslit brain is about how do you empower yourself and others to be very resistant. So as you saw, the people that had read it said things like, it's how you protect the independence of your own thought and your own mind. Oh, that's the end. I was like, I wonder what else I'm going to talk about.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Fraser, for sharing your work. There's so much to think with here. And I find myself caught thinking with the term that you introduced, is it interoception? And wondering about if there was any research on whether you're a discussant on a rainy, windy night, if that will shape the way that people interpret you. So my name's Katie Albrecht, and it is a real pleasure to be here. It's been lovely to get to know you a bit, to share a meal with you yesterday. And so I'm grateful to Dr. Linda Harling-Stalker and Dr. David Young for inviting me to serve as a discussant. So my research has taken up some of these issues in various different ways, in examinations of violence in long-term care, gender-based violence in post-secondary, and trauma-informed care. And although there are some really strong connections, my research has taken up gaslighting and bullying in a different way. As a sociologist, I'm thinking more along the lines of violence as something that's socially organized and culturally produced. But I agree with the importance of thinking about the normalization of harm and repetition, socialization, and relations of power. And of course, also the need for a vocabulary and, you know, the power of the language of mental illness, to recognize it, to name those vocabularies that shape our lives, but also to recognize the possibility that we can relate to them in ways that are reflexive and show agency, and so highlighting the importance of interpretation. And so, so what I'd like to do is just share some thoughts about some of the key themes as I've heard them, as well as provide like a little prompt or a question to hear more from you about your work. And then, of course, we want to make sure there's lots of time for everyone in the audience to have a chance to pose questions. So it's been interesting to identify patterns across what you've shared, patterns with what I've, parallels with what I've seen in my research in sociology. And although the lenses we bring aren't the same, I think I'm listening with what you shared in terms of the importance of holding the two together in tension, and how that can create a habituation, and also help to build critical reflexivity in ourselves, to see how we may rely on heuristics and shortcuts. And so one of the themes that I thought is so powerful in your work is around gaslighting, power, and the irrationality of seemingly rational systems. And so your book challenges the assumption that institutions, so schools, workplaces, corporations, athletics are rational, ethical, and merit-based. You expose how they often reproduce psychological harm under the guise of improvement. So optimization, resilience, performance, and that there's something very ironic about this. The logic, I think, behind today's optimize the brain culture isn't new. It descends from the industrial age model of schooling and workplace management designed to produce kind of compliant, efficient workers. And we've seen this, we could trace it back to John D. Rockefeller and other industrialists, how they funded education systems built around standardization, obedience, output. Corporations adopted similar strategies where there were hierarchies, surveillance, and performance metrics that ensured compliance while rewarding only what served the status quo. And so I think the same mindset now shapes our knowledge economy and the AI-driven productivity culture, where creativity, emotion, and mental life are increasingly mechanized. And so so there's this irony that comes out in your work that is so powerful, as well as a recurring paradox, which we might kind of think of in terms of a productivity facade, that systems that claim to reward excellence often punish those whose talent threatens the status quo. That's a key message, that leaders, high performers, and innovative employees can become the targets of control, gaslighting, or exclusion because their competence maybe challenges entrenched hierarchies, or maybe their style, right? Like that there's something there. The discourse of productivity, efficiency, and merit conceals systemic insecurity, fear of disruption, and abuse of power. So our modern obsession, I think, with improvement conceals this deeper continuity, that the human mind is still disciplined to serve like compliance, yet those who most excel may suffer under the same structures that claim to reward them. And so here's my question. I'm wondering if you could speak to how the irony of the productivity facade may play out for highly talented individuals. This is something you take up in your book at various points.
So when I was looking at how I was going to construct the book, I wanted to choose case studies. So I wanted to start with story because that's how the brain learns. The brain does not retain, it might get excited in the moment by statistics, and it might be startled, and it might be sort of, oh, this is significant to me, the brain, but then it will forget. Whereas the brain doesn't forget stories. When it's attached to people and it's learned about them and it knows about them and it knows their name, then when you want to teach it something, you can just bring that up again and say, well, do you remember in the moment when, case study 1 in the name and case study 2? So I did exactly sort of what you're talking about. I tried to find people that were extremely talented. That was one of my purposeful decisions because I was trying to move away from, you call it an irony and I call it a myth. The myth that when you are talented, which is hammered into us throughout our lives, the more talented you are, the safer you are. The more talented you are, the more indispensable you are. They would never get rid of so-and-so because they're so talented. And all of that is not true. In actual fact, just as you have pointed out, Dr. Albrecht, the talent will put a target on your back if you threaten the psychopaths. And I'm just going to use psychopaths as a short term. You can go and look at the research in the books about what's going on in their brains, but just, it sounds so, maybe I'll just say dark triad. It sounds a little less melodramatic. So people in the dark triad, if you threaten them and you think you might outshine them and you call them out on things they've done that are wrong or that break laws or rules or are incompetent in any way, they will ensure that you are ruined, because you make their lives unbearable. And it might not even be particularly, a psychologist or psychiatrist could map out and pull out the tendrils around how conscious they are and how unconscious they are about these things. But the bottom line is you will need to go. So I chose highly talented people to really study that, because in my line of work, I get a lot of people who say to me, I was bullied because, and then I don't let them finish the sentence, because what I try to get them to understand is they weren't bullied because of anything to do with them. They're irrelevant. It could be their talent. It could be the fact that they put the other person at risk. It could be any tiny detail they can find. The more superficial, the better. It's all irrelevant. It's their own issue that they project upon the target. And so there are 4 key components, and this is what we should be taught rather than the ways in which we are taught, as you just described, which is that talent will protect you, and the institution is ethical, and we're all working together towards a common goal. All those things, if you enter into abuse culture, are not true, but they will use them under the auspices of resilience. I'm going to abuse you. Under the auspices of sport, I'm going to pretend I'm trying to motivate you or discipline you. It's used all the time as the greatest cover-up. And from that whole era that you talked about, but it's extremely dangerous when it's abuse culture, and it's false. So an abuse culture just needs 4 components. It needs humiliation, it needs fear, it needs favoritism. It's one of the most important mechanisms, and it needs retaliation. So if you're reading the news and you want to take a look at that concept and apply it as a blueprint over what's happening in a particular scenario that you're reading about, just see if you can find those 4 factors. If you can identify fear, humiliation, favoritism, and retaliation, you're probably looking at an abuse culture. So, and just to go back to the irony piece of it, or the reversal of expectation, or the mythology. I call it a myth, and that's why I use science. We were talking about, why do you use neuroscience? I use science because science is one of the best ways to debunk a myth. And so another one of the ironies is, I can't remember what I just explained it so well, but that I can't remember what I was going to say. But basically, just my final thing I'll say, hopefully it'll come back to me, but the final thing I want to say about that is that industrial era and that funding of schools and that developing of schools so that it was all about obedience and compliance and sitting down in a desk and adhering to the teacher as the authority figure. All of that is very psychopathic in the way that it's an objectification of the individual, even children. It's treating children as if as long as they obey, then they will be valued and they will get the marks that they need and they will be learners and they will be successful. And none of that is actually proven in science. So when you objectify people, that's very much closely aligned with the dark triad. And it's acting as if they're not humans and they're not biological and they don't have needs and they aren't somehow holistic in the sense. And you can see that's very left brain thinking. And this type of industrialized way of thinking about individuals, even starting in the school system, this training in obedience and compliance, it has been examined in depth as one of the most dangerous things we can do. It's called The Perils of Obedience by Stanley Milgram. And he was studying the Nuremberg trials, and everybody who had participated in the Nazi Holocaust were repeating over and over again, oh, I did that because I was told to. Sort of like, why are you asking me? I was told to do it and I did it. And it's because they were in that system. They were not trained to keep their minds their own. As you saw, one of the readers of Gaslit Brain was like, this is a book about how you maintain that independence, that creativity, that innovation, that compassion, regardless of the culture you're in.
Thank you so much. And I think it's interesting also to think with the different lenses that you shared. And again, there's these splits, these doubles, reversals, dualities, and also your closing words on Elder Dr. Albert Marshall's really call to kind of think with a two-eyed seeing approach. But what can happen is that we don't see differences. So when there is that compliance, we might just assume that everything is an example of passivity. But there's a moment in your book where I was so moved. You're describing this young student, a teenager. It reminded me very much of my own son as I was thinking about it, and how you were like full of hope, and you were going to see these abusers, administrators, abusers in the sense that they weren't hearing what you were sharing, and you were full of hope, but this young boy who had experienced it, he wasn't. There was a sense of dejection, but he still went. I think what was so powerful there is that there was an incredible, I think, resistance and agency in showing up despite how things may turn out. And so thank you for also kind of opening up or sharing an invitation to kind of reimagine what resistance could look like under such conditions. The next thing that I thought was really interesting and hoped you could speak to is related to whistleblowing, compliance. And it reminded me of that expression, what is it, the canary in the coal mine? Has anyone heard of that? Yeah, so since COVID-19, whistleblowing has surged. Actually, there was a call. It was normalized, we could say to some extent. And more people are speaking out about misconduct, bullying, and corruption in various settings, so workplaces, research institutions, and governments. Yet retaliation remains common, and public trust in these institutions continues to fall. Your framework that you provide in the book helps us understand why. Systems built for compliance perceive dissent as contamination. So I thought it was interesting you're using the language of mental illness, a non-communicable disease, according to the World Health Organization, but talking about contagion, how once that violence is normalized, it kind of pervades an environment and people. And the canary in the coal mine is interesting. So historically, miners used canaries to detect invisible toxins, so carbon monoxide and methane gas. And if the canary weakened or died, it warned of danger before humans can sense it. So the canary's suffering was a signal of systemic toxicity. It was also a sacrifice, a small life lost for the survival of the larger group. And I think in your book, you show how this sacrifice that occurs mirrors how institutions treat whistleblowers or victims of bullying today as early warning systems who detect invisible harm, but are often left to absorb it alone. So in your terms, the whistleblower could be understood as the modern canary. They sense what others can't tolerate, ethical, emotional, or moral dissonance. And instead of listening, the institution gaslights the signal, discrediting or pathologizing the person rather than confronting the system's toxicity. And so when ethics processes are co-opted by the same power they are meant to check, the system effectively keeps mining the toxic seam while discarding the dead bird. The canary doesn't just signal toxicity. Your book shows us how it exposes the moral condition of the system. And when the institution ignores suffering, it reveals moral numbness. And so in your book, this appears as a kind of thoughtlessness, or what Hannah Arendt called the banality of evil. And these procedures and policies replace empathy. Rationalization hides cruelty under the language of professionalism and due process. And the canary's death is made invisible by bureaucratic logic. So I wonder if you could say more about whether or how whistleblowers are today's canaries, and what does it take for institutions to truly listen?
There is a chapter in the book, it's chapter 8, that is an interview with one of the leading whistleblower lawyers in the US and the UK. And I didn't use a Canadian lawyer because Canada has some of the worst, I think it's the second worst whistleblower protections in the world. surprisingly enough. So when I this interview with her, the lawyer's name is Mary Inman, was really fascinating because she has studied the phenomenon of people who speak up and the institution and how the institution responds for 20 years. So she's seen it all. And really what she thinks is, which I thought was fascinating, is that it's deeply ingrained into the evolutionary brain not to be a whistleblower. She thinks it goes just ancient times where, you know, you were not meant to question the leader. So if a Tyrannosaurus Rex is approaching, you weren't supposed to turn to the leader and say, you know, what do you mean run? Really? Should we be running for this? I don't think so. Let's fight it. You were just meant to go, and you were meant to go and save the tribe and save the leader and do the right thing and not question anything. But over time, we've of course come into a much more complex society. But we still retain a lot of, she says, for every single language that we have, there's a derogatory term for whistleblowers, for people who speak up. And we teach it early in childhood. We don't be a tattletale, don't be a snitch, you know, these kinds of things. It's like, don't, you know, keep the secrets within the team. Don't take the secrets, you know. All of that kind of training wires our brains, even if it's wiring them unconsciously. So I find whistleblowing so fascinating because I'm the least likely whistleblower on the planet. I'm a very private person. I'm an introvert. I don't like to be the center of attention. None of these things make me feel even remotely comfortable. But I've discovered, and I find this in all the research I've done now into whistleblowing or canaries, is that all of us have a line in the sand. And so when you were talking about that teenager, and this teenager who was able to see much more clearly than I wanted to belong to the community. I wanted to keep my blinders on. I didn't want to believe that my leadership and my colleagues were abusive and that the other colleagues were going to look the other way and they were not going to ask any questions and they were going to protect themselves, even though it meant this massive cover up. And so it was a very soul-searching time for me, and I did speak up, and I had to speak up because that teenager was my son, and we went through it together. We were both whistleblowers. We both spoke to Toronto Star and allowed our pictures to be in the newspaper, and only 1% of the population will allow that. And we were on CTV, the investigative journalist show, about what happened. Because it involved not just a school cover-up, it involved a government cover-up. And so it was national news. And it was a very painful experience. But what fascinated me was how much I wanted to hold on. I found it really hard to be the villain in the story, I didn't want to be part of that. And he was able just to absolutely see through it. So, yeah, I mean, if he was going to self-sacrifice doing this as a canary in the coal mine for the institution, it wouldn't have happened. It couldn't have happened because what he really got, you know, we talk about whistleblowing as self-sacrifice. What he got was self-determination. And so this all happened. He refused to play for these abusive coaches in the final year. And 6 boys refused to play for them. And he was being interviewed. He suffered an extreme depression. I don't want to minimize what he went through. He had extreme anxiety, extreme depression. He dropped from being on the honor roll to not being able to attend classes or go write his exams. He didn't walk across the stage at his grade 12 graduation. It was a very, very hellish time. But he was being interviewed by a university director about going to this university, and there he was, and she was saying, well, what have you learned in your senior years? And I was like, oh no. I was like, please don't ask him that question. And he just looked at her and he said, you know what I really discovered is that I have courage, and a lot of people don't. I was like, wow. And in that moment, I realized it was a self-determination, not a self-sacrifice.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So I'll just share some closing thoughts and a closing question, and then we can open it up to everyone here. I'm sure there's lots of questions from the audience. I was really struck, especially as I moved through the book, by how you, I think, took up collective consciousness, reflexivity, and repair, how you used, I think, the language of neuroscience to tell a story. And really, a message that I heard from it was to heal the gaslit brain. We have to move from individual pathology to systemic accountability. So this may sound strange given references to psychiatric typifications, but that it was really there, that it's about systemic accountability. And really, I saw that you envision a recovery of collective consciousness. So not just collective consciousness, but a remembering, a recovery, a shared moral awareness that allows societies to feel and act together. And that this requires critical reflexivity, so recognizing how our own habits and privileges sustain harmful systems, empathy and compassion, valuing emotional intelligence as central to ethical life, structural change, so transforming environments, not individuals, to make care and justice sustainable. And so my final question is, what would a reflexive or empathetic institution actually look like?
I think that the key would be, and it goes back to something that we talked about earlier, is this idea that we understand that when you want to get really good at mathematics, you have to do it day in, day out. If you really want to get good at soccer or hockey or language or critical thinking, all these things that, we spend years and years and years sculpting and shaping brains for this type of performance. We have to take that same approach when it comes to brain health and keeping our empathy. If you read the researchers on empathy, the first thing they will say is they'll just be sort of flabbergasted that empathy is arguably, in their minds, it is without a doubt the most important brain component, brain capacity that human beings have. And we don't teach it. It is not taught day in, day out in school. It isn't taught in parenting classes. It's not taught in university, and it's not brought up every single day in the workplace, but it should be. We have a very bad habit of putting, we say things like, and I love your reference to rationality and these kind of programs and controls, and how ironic it is because they collapse and fail all the time, but we keep trying to do them the same way. So I was part of a task force that was looking at abuse in gymnastics in Canada. And so we went to 9 different countries that had done these kinds of abuse explorations and trying to inquiries and commissions and so on. And all of these 9 countries had come up with, it's identical, it's textbook, doesn't matter what the nation is, it's all the same. It's just abuse culture over and over and over again. And so they had done all this work, these incredible things had happened. They put together this new booklet. And so we were like, wow, that's fantastic. And that all of them ended on, and the book is now in the office of the leader gathering dust. It has made no change. Now, everywhere we go, there's a policy and procedure manual. How many times do we open it up? Do we do that daily, weekly? Do we take the 15 minutes to do the big circle, talk about how people are feeling, interacting? What's our vocab word that we're going to learn? How does our brain make us behave in ways that are either really fabulous or potentially really risky? These are the conversations aren't happening. So I think the empathic, healthy, brain healthy institution that understands that mental health and brain health are 2 sides of the same coin, and that our brains are incredibly adept at change. They're neuroplastic. From the very last day we are on the planet, we can change our brains. We can make them stronger, healthier, more empathic, anything we want. It's amazing. And so that's what we need to do. It needs to just become much more of our culture. We have to stop objectifying people and turning them into factory workers in our school programs. For a really good example of this is in Denmark. They teach kids starting in 6-year-olds to 16-year-olds. They have weekly training in empathy and compassion. I'm not seeing that in Canadian schools, but I'm looking forward to it beginning.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Fraser.
Thank you very much. Very thoughtful discussions. So let's take a little bit of time. Let's open the floor up for any questions that folks might have. Speaker.
Thank you. I really enjoyed your presentation. I'm really curious about the 84 pages that were left out. It sounds like based on your research, you were probably rubbing your hands together with what's going on in other parts of the world. And I'm curious if you can share with us some of what was in the 84 pages, maybe summarize a little bit based on the research that you've been doing, because I think it's an interesting study for sure.
My publisher is American. So what they felt was that 50% of the readers in America would just simply not look at the book. They wouldn't want to learn anything about it. They wouldn't be able to be reflexive or open up their minds or just try and have a different perspective on what's going on. And so it was probably quite a wise decision, but it's really interesting. I mean, it's like what I was telling you is that once you see gaslighting and you study it, you see it happening all around you all the time. So when you look at the political situation, I was interviewed today by, some of the local TV station and the CBC and so on. And we were talking about the fact that, so when you're of a certain age, for the young people here, trust us when we say, back in the day, so I was a professor at University of Toronto for 6 years, and then I taught in independent schools. If I had ever walked in front of my class and said, residential schools, that's not true, didn't happen, or the Holocaust, let me give you the numbers that I got here, and I just blatantly lied to my class of students, just a lie, I would be instantly fired. I would be fired that day. My computer would be taken from me. It would be over. So how is it possible that we're living right now in a world where even in Western democracies, we're pretty used to propaganda, we're used to disinformation in totalitarian dictatorships. We are used to people being thrown out of windows. They're put in prisons when they are a rival or a talent or a threat to the psychopathic brain. We're used to that. We just haven't seen it in a very close to us Western democracy before. And that's where I see what the abuse culture people call a slippery slope. It's a very, very dangerous one, where the fact that blatant lies, pathological lies, and the way in which they're correlated with mental illness has been utterly normalized it's honestly stunning to me every single day. Every day I get up, I'm like, I can't believe this is even happening. So we're in a world, to go back to Dr. Albrecht's point about these ironies, these paradoxes, we're trained to believe something, but it's not actually playing out in the world that we're living in. And that cognitive dissonance is very stressful for us. And a really good example of that is you will see in America stricter and stricter laws on bullying. If you are bullying as a teenager in New Jersey and places like that, you are held to almost criminal standards. It is suspension. It is expulsion. You are not allowed to do it by law. So we have a situation across the border where we have children who are held to higher legal standards than people who run the nation. So I don't even know where to begin. What I'm doing though is every time I'm having a fit about this, I write about it in my Bullied Brain Substack. And I don't know if you've come across Substack. It's designed for writers. It's people that can't stop themselves from saying what they want to say in written form. So it's a dream come true platform for me. So I write all the time on Substack about specific stories that are happening in the news. So when Putin said, the military assault, my invasion of Ukraine, where I started bombing and killing and destroying a country that was next to me with zero provocation, it was the fault of the West. I had one of my fits, and then I just put it into a Substack, and then I feel better and I go about my day. So that's where it is.
Question. Fascinated. Thank you. In Nova Scotia, the whistleblower goes through the office of the Ombudsman, the Nova Scotia Ombudsman. And the Ombudsman eventually speaks to the whistleblower and gives you the gaslit reason why nothing's going to change. It's truly phenomenal. So then you might go to the Freedom of Information Protection and Privacy, see if you can dig up a little more information to take back to the ombudsman. And then you might have to go to human rights. And eventually it gets deep-sixed so that you may end up in an office of a secretary one day who says, well, we're going to have to register you you'll have to be registered. And all of a sudden you realize that the whistleblowing is going to stop you in your tracks because things are still so micromanaged. Micromanagement, in my estimation, needs to be on this list of fear, favoritism, retaliation, humiliation. Micromanagement is humiliation. That's what it is.
That's exactly what it is.
Thank you.
That is a perfect definition of.
I'm nothing.
Oh,
go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say it's a perfect definition of how gaslighting works. Go on.
Thank you. So you can tell I've had some intimate experiences. That aside, I want to know about the sociopath in this picture. Is that not in the triangle, but could you tell me a little bit about the sociopath, what you know about it? Thanks. Pleasure.
Yeah, the way, when I look up these definitions, my definition differs. So I'll just give you my definition. In my mind, a sociopath is somebody who's had their brain wired to believe a certain thing about the world. And it happens in their formative years, usually, although it can happen later. And so it can go back to this industrial complex or the factory way in which a brain is trained. We can say the same thing for the sociopath. The sociopath can be trained to believe, let's use our big simple ones. They can be trained to be a racist. They can be trained to be a misogynist, Islamophobic, homophobic, whatever we want, those ageist. I mean, they can be trained in that way and their brain will be wired that way. And it's, when they look at the brains of children in places like North Korea, what they see is that their brains are so wired to hate the West. It's built into their school system. So their children's stories, their math problems, geography, whatever you like, they do the kind of training we were saying we should be doing in empathy, they do in hatred of the enemy, and the enemy is the West. And they find that their brains are very, very rigid. They get to a point where they cannot entertain diverse perspectives. I mean, one of the greatest gifts that empathy gives us is it trains us in critical thinking, because we never believe in singular focus. Singular focus is a neuroscience term for what happens in the dark triad's brain. They are only able to see themselves, and everyone else is an object, or they're expected to be mirrors. They are mirrors that represent either how they aggrandize you, or they mirror back your cruelty, or they mirror back your power. And I mean, I've said in a number of the talks that I've given, but I think it's quite amazing. So we get Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. That takes us back to the 19th century. But I was trying to say to myself, when is the first time Western culture really has documented this gaslighting phenomenon? It's got to be new, right? 1944 movie. I mean, how old can it be? But when I listen to what you're speaking about, I hear Kafka. It's Kafka, ask what they put you through. And it's designed to make you crazy. And then they tell you you're crazy. That's pure gaslighting. But when we look at Western culture, it goes all the way back to the New Testament. I couldn't believe it. We were told, according to Matthew, quoting Jesus, back in the day, we were told to watch out for wolves in sheep's clothing. We were told to watch out for the false prophet. And we're still not great at doing that. We still really struggle to see it. And that's why I spend so much time on perception and visual and progressive glasses and seeing with both hemispheres. And I have a belief system that if we lived in a world where we perpetually made the brain visible, so going back to what should the institution look like that changes this kind of culture? If we think of, so again, for the young people here, you didn't grow up this way, but all the older people here did. We grew up where smoking was normal. Everybody smoked. It was completely normal. Your doctor smoked, your physiotherapist smoked, your personal trainer smoked while they told you to work in the gym. Everybody smoked. It was like you didn't think about it. And we were also told to believe that it made us healthy, it made us tough, it made us independent like the Marlboro Man, and it made us sophisticated like Hollywood actresses. And of course we believed it. We were socialized to believe it. We became sociopaths for smoking. And then all of a sudden they were like, oh yeah, sorry, guys, sorry. It actually gives you cancer. We were like, oh, thanks a lot. So then we were all addicted. We all had to stop. But look at the visualization of what non-invasive technology shows us. They use the X-ray, right? They make us see through the X-ray's eyes. This is more of the visualization metaphor. We see through it, the technology, to understand what the naked eye can't see. We could be doing that with the brain. It should be everywhere. This is the brain of a bullied person. This is the brain of PTSD. Do you really want to give someone brain damage? 99.9% of the population is going to say no. Well, then they want to learn how not to ever do it, right? We naturally are, we are built that way. Our brains are created that way. So we should be harnessing all of that. When we are visual creatures, when we can't see something, we ignore it. So we ignore our brains. And, you know, your story that you told, I have been through the exact same thing. This is why I'm on the East Coast presenting my book and not the West Coast, because I went through the representative for teacher. I went through the representative for children and youth. I went through the ombudsperson's office. I went through the Ministry of Education. I went through the Commissioner for Teacher Regulation. I went to the police. I couldn't get anybody to stop child abuse. Zero. So this is where I have a particular, you know, I went through what you went through, and it is designed to make you completely lose your mind, and not losing your mind is exactly what we want to do. Yeah.
On a slightly different topic, but I would love to know your reaction. Kind of when I came tonight, not only to hear what you were going to say about your research, but I look at the media right now, and going back to being older, when you only had 2 channels on your TV, you could pretty much trust the source that was coming to you. And nowadays, with phones and almost everybody picking up their information that way, it's just like the Wild West. You can say anything on these things right now, so you don't know who to trust. Like, how do you see that impact? Like, you think of that at all in your research? Like, is there, like, we're out of control right now when it comes to how information is disseminated?
I would say that is all by design. And I am in an absolute fury against the lawmakers who could be putting in major regulations. So what do? They gaslight all of us into thinking that they really care about regulating the information, especially for our precious children. So they're going to ban the books. You're like, wait, what? You know, with gaslighting, that's what you're always saying. You're like, okay, you're going to ban all those really dangerous books for kids. Thank you. Wait a second. What about social media? Oh, there's no mention of that. How many kids do you think are getting really badly harmed and influenced by picture books? Like none. Or books by Margaret Atwood? Probably not too many. How many kids do you think are being well, the neuroscientists are documenting it, as we talked about in one of our talks. They don't use these words ever. It's the first time I've seen neuroscientists kind of step out of science and use a term like this. They're talking about children with brain rot. They're using the word rot. They don't do that unless they're feeling emotional. They don't feel emotional a lot of the time. So that should be very concerning to all of us. I cannot believe it's being allowed. We have known since Facebook it opened up to all colleges in the US. And when it opened up to all colleges in the US, we saw an 83% spike in severe depression in college populaces. And we still haven't put any rules, regulations, laws. There's neuroscientists that specifically write about that. And what they say is they've done all these studies where when you put a marker on anything on social media, this is not true. This has no factual basis. This is false. it makes a huge difference in it just shuts down the proliferation. It stops the dissemination. All of this should be happening, but it's like, we used to live in a law-abiding society, but since technology rolled in, it's like, oh no, journalism, we don't care if it's journalism or if it's somebody talking on TikTok, it's all the same. And that neutralizing of truth tellers versus just anyone, like, as another thing that we talked about is, you know, back in the day, there was nothing more sort of horrifying or shameful than the Ku Klux Klan. They couldn't show people what they were doing. They had to cover themselves up because even they knew that what they were doing was against the law. It was wrong. It was sick and twisted, really, really sick and twisted. So they covered up. This is what Dr. Jekyll would do. He covered up by taking a potion. He didn't want anyone to know that the good doctor would go out and murder people like a Ku Klux Klan. So he took a potion that covered himself up he made himself into Mr. Hyde to get away with it. Well, the internet is designed for people to cover up what they're doing. They don't have to associate their name, their address. They have no responsibility. They have no accountability. It's like, how did that ever happen? As if this virtual world is a safe place where people can do whatever they want, but the real world is where it's serious. Well, we know that's not how the brain works. That's not true. They might not be able to physically get at us through the internet, but they can damage our brains, and that's exactly what they're doing. But we live in a society where lawmakers aren't protecting brains. Our laws haven't caught up. I don't know why they haven't. I daily am asking myself that question. So yes, I think a ton about media, and I have one sentence in the book about AI because AI is a whole other book if you're talking brain science. But when you're talking about the psychopathic brain, as we discussed, it has high levels of language and cognition. It's a genius, high levels, charismatic. They're smart. They're intelligent, off the charts oftentimes. When your brain reacts emotionally to something, their brain does not. The empathy doesn't light up. The emotional center doesn't light up. What lights up? What gets the resources in the brain? Language and cognition. No empathy, no effective empathy. Well, that's just an apt description of AI right there. So we're creating a technology, and we're telling our next generation, guess what? The psychopathic technology we've created is going to take your job from you. You're not going to be able to create a livelihood. Good luck with that. It's like, I don't know. I mean, you get to the point where I'm telling you, sitting writing this book, I'm like, I am losing my mind. This is our world right now.
May I say have a quick comment on that too? I'm just thinking about the two channels, and I remembered I had a memory that came back. My brain gave me a memory of growing up, and we had those two channels. It wasn't necessarily that you could trust what they were saying, right? Like, so you may have only had a limited scope that you could pay attention to. Your attention was directed, but that news broadcaster may have been the one that was smoking a cigarette, telling you it was okay. And so I just also think, like, how do we think with that? If there's something about technology here and the multiplicity of perspectives that we may have access to now, but yeah.
I think for me, when I look back to that era, and I utterly fully agree with you, at the same time as my brain instantly goes to, okay, well, how do we discern? And for me, it's this cover up piece that really gets me. It's the Ku Klux Klan cover. It is the ICE masks. If ICE is doing something that is fair and true and legal and honorable and is, it's what police do, right? They're protectors. They keep the peace, right? If that's what they are, then why are they covering their faces? If a journalist came on and they were, brown paper bag, or they were blacked out in some way, so you couldn't see who they were, and they were like, believe what I tell you, I'm not going to attach my name to it. Or even worse, the more gaslighting form of that is, I have such a high position of power that I can say to you whatever I want. Like my boss did right to my face. He told me in no uncertain terms, you have a choice here. You've got two realities to choose from. You want to stick to your reality, or are you going to adhere to my reality? That'd probably be the smarter move. Economically, financially, reputationally, absolutely, he was right. But they underestimate. They are very used. They've done this forever. This guy he's so used to doing this, he just assumed that he was dealing with the usual person. But his mistake was, and it's again that line in the sand, what should we be talking about? What is your line in the sand at work? We all have diverse ones, different ones. For me, it's my kids. You know, I can be I was a believer. I wanted to believe. I wanted to be part of that community, but not if it meant sacrificing my kids. That was my line. So he just made a mistake in that moment. Plus, I'm a researcher, so I didn't take him at face value. I was like, I don't believe that, and went to see what the expert said.
Okay, we just have one last question here.
Yeah, Doctor, you kind of answered my comment there by, like, when that was going on in your school in BC, then you were just believing and you know what was happening, but until your right hemisphere came into effect with your own son, and it made you passionate to the point of your left hemisphere really kicking in, right? So that can happen too. I think the right hemisphere will always win in the end because it's ruled by your heart. And it makes you passionate enough. It doesn't make you vulnerable. It just gives you that passion to find out the truth.
Yeah, I think that's a really beautiful way to put it. Yeah, I mean, again, exercises in our workplaces, in our schools, getting everybody conversant on, you have this superpower in your brain. It fuels your ethics. It fuels your relationships. You can tap into it. I think that's really just a gorgeous way to say it.
All right, on that lovely note, please join me in thanking Dr. Jennifer Fraser and Dr. Katie Albrecht. Just as a token of our appreciation, Dr. Fraser.
I've received so many presents. I feel like I'm in a little Christmas event. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to the McKenna Center for joining us in this partnership. Dr. Fraser will be around for a little bit, so if you have questions that I didn't get to out there, please feel free to come up and have a little chat. As per usual, at the end of these events, I say if your calendar is already not full, there's a few events coming up over the next couple of weeks. Tomorrow, particularly for students, we have a lunch and learn with Dr. Fraser up in the Hudson Boardroom on the 4th floor. Free food, free knowledge for students. Please come on out. It doesn't come out of your tuition, so come and take advantage of it. Next week, if you're floating around, I know it's break, the Mulroney Institute is holding a little symposium on the 60th anniversary of Lament for a Nation, which is the book that talks about Canadian nationalism and how the US were going to make us redundant. And here we are 60 years and we're still talking about that event. And then on the 18th, following up on the questions about AI, one of our really wonderful graduates from 2020, who's now a PhD student in Ottawa, has written a book called Artificially Intelligent. David Elliott, he had an honors degree from sociology. He's going to be here with his book from U of T Press. And if you're an academic and you have a U of T, like you have a university press book and you haven't even finished your PhD, it's very impressive. And he's one of ours. So it's wonderful to claim that. So please come out if you're interested in these questions around AI and how that relates to who we are and how that will kind of play out. Please come see David Elliott on the 18th at 7 o'clock. Is that it, Anna? Oh, yes. And then on the 20th, another lunch and learn will be happening. We will officially be welcoming at that time Sandy Silver, no longer honorable, but honorable in our hearts, our data lake practitioner in residence, where he will be doing a lunch and learn around the tentative title is From X-Ring to Premiership. So come and learn how Mr. Silver went from being a StFX student, just like folks here, CHIL students here, to being premier of one of our territories, the Yukon. That's the one he was premier of. As you can tell, it's getting late in the evening. So that, folks, thank you for coming out. Thank you for supporting the Mulroney events, as well as the McKenna events. Drive safe, and we'll see you next time.